I want to welcome everybody to the first ever PSEO showcase. My name is Rachel Boon. I am the Chief Academic Officer at the Iowa Board of Regents, but I also serve as the PSEO Coalition Board Vice Chair. So I am serving in a role that normally David Troutman, as our chair, would be serving in today. Unfortunately, David had a family commitment, so was unable to be here. I am thrilled to welcome you all and grateful that you've made time to be here. Just very quickly, for anybody who is somewhat new to a PSEO coalition and the work, we are a growing network of representatives from institutions, colleges, states, systems across the country that are partnering with the U.S. Census Bureau, providing data for post-secondary employment outcomes and education outcomes of students that enroll. We're at 32 states and counting in terms of the footprint of PSEO at the moment. The coverage is exciting because it's just a good sign that what we're doing matters. It's good and interesting data that is really helping us all with the work that we're doing. We're here because we've had a lot of generous support as well from Strata Education Network. We work with other foundations as well who are providing support, and I'll let Gina fill in if I'm missing any of those later. But we had over 300 people sign up to join us throughout the showcase today, and that's just thrilling to know that there's that kind of interest in this work. And I hope that everybody is able to find this to be informative and helpful. I'm hoping you walk away inspired for a new project, a new collaboration, partnership, some sort of plan you can do to enhance some of your work. Based on what you hear from our member states and some of the interns that we're working with to really advance the work. And I think some of that inspiration might come from our plenary speaker today. So I'm going to transition to welcome Dr. Bennett Boggs, who's the Missouri Commissioner for the Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development. We're thrilled that everybody can hear from him. I believe his bio is being dropped into the chat, so I'm not going to read to you the details of his biographical background, but I do want to say that I believe the breadth of experiences he's had really lends him well to sort of share some thoughts with all of us today. He has been connected to pretty much every sector of post-secondary education throughout different phases of his career. So I know his remarks today are going to resonate with a lot of us, and I really just want to turn it over to you now and welcome you. Thank you, Dr. Boggs.
Rachel, thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to be here. I appreciate this opportunity. I'm going to go ahead and hit shared screen here. Let's see how this goes. And let me get my going here. There, does that work? Can you all see that fine?
Not yet from my end. Do you want to check that one more time?
Let me go back here.
All right, we're getting your screen. So once you hit.
How about that?
That's perfect. Thank you so much. Right.
Very good. Glad we got that worked out. Let me also move this so I can see my notes. Here we go. Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here. And yes, I am pleased to be, I'm privileged to be the Commissioner of Higher Education and Workforce Development for Missouri. And what I would like to do today is talk about three areas of our discussion. One is a little bit about our Missouri model, which I think is a little unique among the states. Although, frankly, to be honest, I think we're all going to head in this direction. So if you'd like to just learn a little bit about what we're trying to do in Missouri, I bet you already do elements of this. And I bet in the future, you're going to be even more along the lines of what we are doing in terms of trying to combine higher education and workforce development. I'd like to talk a minute about our Missouri model in terms of what our model here does for us in terms of data, but also would like to take a second to talk about how important PSEO is and how we are anticipating the work that you do as a coalition really is going to help us get the work done we need to do here. The Missouri model is a unique combination of the traditional Department of Higher Education, along with what would be the traditional State Office of Workforce Development. We also have a third component. It's a research team called MERIC, which is the Missouri Economic Research Information Center. I'll talk a little bit more about them in a little bit. But together, these are merged into the Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development. And the acronym for that, if you don't say Missouri, it's DHEWD, D-H-E-W-D. We play that a lot, outrageous dudes and righteous dudes and all of that. So we thoroughly enjoy that. along with other state agencies around us. But when I accepted this position as a commissioner, I called my counterpart in Oregon, Ben Cannon. So a shout out to Amy Cox out there if she's online. Ben and I had a nice talk, and he told me that while Oregon has some connections between higher education and workforce, it's not as intentional or as active as what we're trying to do here in Missouri. And so for Missouri, we really are the only state that has chosen to fully combine the public workforce development system of the state with the coordination of our public higher education institutions with the policies and the funding. And this alignment gives Missourians the full breadth of options available to enable them to quality and meaningful employment. There's about 300 of us in the department, and about half of us work at job centers statewide. And that's part of the public workforce. We have 22 job centers scattered throughout the state where people who are seeking employment come into our offices and do a battery of tests and things of that nature when they're just seeking jobs. We provide that service. So it might be interesting the fact that we're a department, we're also a cabinet level agency with the authorization coming from our coordinating board, and it provides the oversight, it hires my position, it adopts a strategic plan statewide. And I'm sure many of your states are very similar to that. However, along with that, our coordinating board, like many on the call, I imagine, is intentionally bipartisan. We have 9 members chosen by the governor. They represent the 8 U.S. congressional districts of the state with 1 at-large member. No more than 5 of the 9 can be from one political party. So it really is a bipartisan or nonpartisan group. And frankly, this model works very well, I have found so far. But we also have a statewide workforce development board with 22 members representing an array of workforce areas. So there's 4 state departments representing labor, representatives of regional workforce boards, and more. So this board helps advise and guide the public workforce development system, and it's required by federal guidelines for our WIOA funds. I happen to sit on that board, and what would be my vice president for workforce is actually the executive director of that board. So that's a leftover from the old model for the merger, but we haven't untangled that yet because we're still following the current federal guidelines. So while many of you work for a council or board, we in Missouri have the pleasure of having 2 boards. But it's the coordinating board that is our authorizing group, and they're the ones to whom I report and am held accountable. You can see here our mission, our vision, every Missourian empowered with the skills and education needed for success. And our mission is to put Missourians on a path to learn, work, and prosper. So you can already see in this, we really are focused on economic and workforce development. This is an oversimplification, but these are our primary focus areas. And what makes us a bit different from the other CEOs, as I've mentioned now, is the state public workforce system and as it relates to this conversation. But we also have the strong research arm, including MERIC, the Missouri Economic Research Information Center. And they do a lot of the trending forecast, economic forecast, job, workforce. They do it statewide, but they also break it up by state regions. So it's very useful in terms of different regions and chambers of commerce and things of that nature. Where things get complicated draws from 2 areas in regards to our components, and that is funding and culture. The Workforce Development Division, along with the 22 job centers, the related staffs and initiatives, they rely heavily on federal funding from the U.S. Department of Labor. And that brings in the federal WIOA funds, including Wagner-Pfizer. And as you can imagine, that often then involves a separate set of audits and accountabilities, budgeting structures, guidelines, et cetera. We have a contact person with the U.S. Department of Labor out of Chicago, and we're in regular communication with them. The Policy and Budget Division, along with our state financial aid programs, are primarily funded by state appropriations, much like I'm sure in your state. And again, that's a different set of structures and guidelines. Our research and analysis team draws from a combination of state and federal funds. MERIC is primarily a self-contained federally funded group, and the other data folks are more of the traditional in-state data work. So one of our greatest challenges is having our finance and budget staff well-versed in these differences between the state and federal guidelines, and to be able to explain and articulate those differences from various staffs and internal and external inquiries. I also mentioned the cultural differences. the higher ed, the traditional higher ed group with the traditional higher ed perspective. We even talk about things in terms of what are we going to get done this semester? What's the project we can do? Are we going to convene the CAOs? What's the academic calendar? When are they available? When are the exams? When's graduation week? I'm sure you do a lot of that as well. But there's that kind of mentality of operating on the academic calendar. The workforce component's much more immediate and pragmatic. Academic calendar doesn't mean much of anything to their day-to-day lives, particularly out in the job centers scattered throughout the state. But you can see, though, if you talk about how do we bring these services together, there's opportunities and great potential to pursue, particularly when we start talking about the differences in the changing demographics, changing economics, and changing technologies, and what's going to be facing our states in the upcoming, well, facing now, but certainly all the more in the next decade or so. And when we start looking at going after non-traditional students and adult learners, when we start talking about reskilling and upskilling, we start talking about shrinking demographics. And that shrinking demographics not only impacts the traditional enrollment numbers of traditional age students, it also impacts the traditional workforce because they're not growing either. So you're going to need the current workforce to be able to work longer and work better. And in terms of technology, you guys, I'm sure, are hearing plenty about AI. How is that going to come in and change things? But also, how are people going to be trained to be able to work with AI? So our department manages a host of programs and monitors a variety of policies to meet workforce and higher education related challenges. And again, much like your states, we have a lot of examples of different labels we have on different programs that comes out of our department. We administer and improve state financial aid programs such as Fast Track, which is focused on non-traditional adult learners who want to change careers into more high-demand programs. Our A+ program, which covers community college tuition for high school students. And then we also have our need-based Access Missouri. In addition to the 22 comprehensive job centers I've mentioned, we also have direct support for veterans. And we have paid staff who focus on veterans issues. And we also have 10 reentry centers across the state, and we work in close association with the Department of Corrections and Corrections Facilities. I'll talk a bit about more of that in a minute as well. We complete an evaluation of the impact of our transfer policies. We continue to grow our apprenticeship program and our pre-apprenticeships. And Missouri is a top state now in apprenticeships by numbers, not by rates, but we have a large participation. And we support a legislative work group with performance-based funding framework. I'm sure many of you work on that. We probably are in contact with many of your colleagues in your states in terms of how we're trying to update our performance-based funding framework. In Missouri, we're still using a formula that was put in place in 1992. It's been tweaked a time or so, but it's time for us to revamp it. And that is a big deal here. So we got to get through that. But we also, let's see, we continue also developing our P20W longitudinal data system. I'll talk a bit about that in a second too. And then we have launched an adult learner outreach initiative. And part of that, again, is going back after the non-traditional learners, but also going back and getting those that never got into a post-secondary pathway. So here are some of our big goals. Like most states, we have a strategic goal, an attainment goal of 60%. Our latest counting is just, I think, about a month or so old now. It's 52.2%, and we're trying to get to 60. But what may make us unique is we have a second one. We have a 70% labor force participation goal, and we're currently at 63.1%. These goals were formed by taking a look at our fellow Midwestern states here in our Midwestern region. And we looked at where our sister states were, and then we tried to calculate where could we be to be in the top of that group. And that's where we came up with these numbers. I'll give you I'm getting old now. One of my side notes, one of the first Lumina policy retreats I went to, we had breakout groups talking about different states and their attainment numbers. And I was floored more than I was asking, I was new and I was asking questions. How did different states calculate their numbers? And more than a couple states said, well, we were looking for a good motto. So, Route 66 by 2066 or something, or 40 by 2040 or something. And I was thinking, I was floored. It was just, what's a good motto? And we'll go backwards from there. I think we've all grown from that moment, but that was the first startup. You probably are familiar with the data behind the goals. Jobs in Missouri, especially those that will be created in the coming years, require education and training at all levels. You can see here that for Missouri, 2/3 of all jobs will require something past high school. And that includes all levels, certificates, 2 years, 4 years, degrees. Out of that 65%, about 30 needs a bachelor's degree or higher. So 35% needs something past high school, but all needs something past high school. But of the 65, 30, we're looking for a 4-year degree or higher. And I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, are familiar with Georgetown University's Center on Education in the Workforce with their national report that calls for 72% of all jobs we require something past high school by 2031. It's this kind of information that is at the heart of what our department is all about. And this is also the story we tell to legislators, to community leaders, to chambers of commerce. This is the angle where we're talking about the importance of post-secondary education to the state's prosperity and to preparing Missourians on the pathways to have good, fruitful work lives. But it's also talking about how economic development and community development go hand in hand. So this is how we do try to get everybody's attention and keep everybody on board. And we do this through engaging the communities in conversations. And this is one of the things we've done in terms of focusing on workforce and working with employers across the state. Again, with our workforce component of the department, we're able to do employer surveys and talk about what are their needs and where is the Missouri workforce for their regions and statewide. So we listen and take time and talk to them and see where they are. But we also use data to form our stories. And as many of you know, if you get the way to do this, the best is, of course, get the data, but then find a good anecdote that reflects the data so that you can tell a good human story that reflects the larger picture. And so we do seek to connect the workforce development with the economic development, leading to overall community and statewide development. So for instance, when our unemployment rate is on par with the nation, many of our neighbors have stronger labor force participation and rates are lower in the rural counties. Our employer surveys tell us they're struggling to find qualified applicants, especially in high demand industries. And so then we have conversations of how can we be a better support to the rural communities. We also use data to help frame trends impacting the changing demographics and to help us consider alternatives to traditional higher education. For example, our overall college and university enrollments have declined with fewer high school students going to college in Missouri, and is also getting more difficult to make more Missourians to have the same chance of being competitive for quality jobs, regardless of zip code, family background, race, or ethnicity. And that's part of the beauty of our apprenticeship program that I mentioned earlier, in helping to create post-secondary pathways, even for those who really aren't interested in traditional college. And I'm finding this is going to be true in your states as well. I'm finding here in Missouri, we've got a new governor who's very interested in CTE work. And so we are also, we've already got a lot going on in CTE, but we're helping to bring that to the fore as a way to get the pathway started and then to start talking about stackable credentials, leading to more workforce preparation and to reskill and upskill as they go into their careers. I'd like to take a second now that I've talked about the Missouri model to talk about our data as it relates to the Missouri model. So this is one thing that this brings us is the opportunity to this slide shows what we already have now in-house. Because we've merged with workforce and traditional higher ed, we've got a pretty broad array of what's available. And then that others might have to have interagency agreements to share in other states. We've already got this under one roof. So this is our in-house group. And it's pretty, if you take a look at this slide there, it's pretty nice, an array of things we have. So a lot of our work is how do we better connect what we have, make it available, make good use of it. I guess for an example, we have an administrative data set collected from our institutions, a host of data collected through our role approving programs at public institutions and authorizing private and for-profit institutions. And of course, then we have the data collected through the workforce activities. But we also have additional agreements and data integration that allows us to answer many questions that might present additional barriers elsewhere. For example, we're able to examine wage outcomes for apprenticeship completers. And we do this in state So we still have to come up with these, and we do here, you see some with the U.S. Department of Labor, and that's because we were to draw from the workforce angle. And Missouri has developed an educational longitudinal data system. Many of your states already have longitudinal systems. Many, but 23, 27 already do. And many of you have helped provide advice and assistance as Missouri's been talking about our program. Thank you for your generosity and your ability to learn from the models. And Jeremy Kinzel directs this program for us, and he's maybe on this call. We'll see how this goes for us. But here's a timeline. We've been working on this for some time to better utilize cross-sector longitudinal data to better understand educational workforce journey. And as you can see, this program started in 2008 when the conversation started. And it really took off in 2022, 2019, 2022. They've been building blocks here. It's been 15 years. But the growing volume and the complexity of the questions, as well as support from many interested partners inside and outside state government, led by former Governor Mike Parson in 2023, to propose a team of dedicated resources within DUDE and to focus on the work. The General Assembly approved the request, which has allowed us to focus on P20W and greatly accelerate. We know the system won't reach its true potential without continued collaboration with our partners, and we do have a number of partners. Here, our sister agencies that help us, primarily our state K-12 education department, which is known as DESE, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, along with the Department of Labor and Industrial Relations, the Department of Corrections, the Department of Revenue, which gives us access to driver's license records, and others. In terms of government governance, these departments form the core. My counterparts, the division commissioners, come together to serve as the advisory / governing board, and we get together as the needs arise. I informally call this group our in-house UN Security Council. We invite other departments to join us, other department heads to join us when the conversations are going in that direction. But it's this core 4 or 5 of us that come together to regularly talk about P20W and how it's going, and Jeremy Kinzel guides us through the latest developments. These are the primary areas that what you see on the screen. These are the primary areas in the research questions that we're currently able to explore within the system. For example, what are the employment and wage outcomes for high school graduates who did or did not immediately enroll in college? We can compare that. How do post-secondary and employment outcomes differ from high school graduates who did or did not participate in career and technical education? How do registered apprenticeships impact the trainees' post-completion employment and wage trajectory? And then how do justice-involved individuals who receive training while incarcerated fare on reentry? And I mentioned earlier, we have 10 reentry centers that our department has overseas. And each year, Missouri places 19,000 individuals on parole. And again, your state, of course, might vary by population, but I'm sure you also have a substantial number. That 19,000 individuals will go on to parole. These individuals are going to go straight into the workforce. So the questions are they prepared? Are there opportunities available? Is a support system in place to lead them to success? In Missouri, and I bet it's similar to your state, 95%, bottom line, 95% of the people who go into incarceration will eventually be released. So how do we prepare them for success? And how do we, what's the procedure and how can we track that and make good policy decisions? So it's in our own enlightened self-interest to do this well and to prepare the individual for success for themselves and their family, to help the region and the community be ready to meet their economic and workforce needs. And frankly, the states that seem to do this well, they have greatly reduced recidivism. And that is the bottom line for the state. You've got to greatly reduce recidivism. You reduce costs. You can redirect those funds. You don't need for prison facilities or prison security systems. You can put them more into different educational and preparation programs. So I want to talk a bit here. Why does PSEO matter? Well, we have some advantages to our data structure. PSO's national reach makes it an invaluable resource. We've been a member with PSEO since 2021. Bilateral agreements between states and agencies still have their purpose, but it would take a tremendous amount of time and effort for us to maintain agreements with our 8 neighbors in Missouri. We've got 8 states surrounding us. I think it's ourselves and one other state have the most neighbors. We have 8. So to keep up with all those agreements, and let alone all the states participating in the excuse me, LED partnership that underpins PSEO. The PSEO coalition also serves as an invaluable resource for DUDE staff to learn about priorities in other states around cross-sector longitudinal data and program outcomes and major policy initiatives, as well as barriers and solutions from those who are doing similar work. As in many of these situations, we get to learn from you, perhaps you learn from us, and we all come out a little better off, a little further ahead. And we are energized about the work of this coalition. Our coordinating board, our state workforce development board, and those we partner closely with, including the State Board of Education overseeing K-12. We all want to understand mobility patterns, outcomes, and efficiency and efficacy of our policies. We are forever describing data limitations and nuances, and to have a more accurate and complete picture is just crucial to our ability to do good policy work, particularly as the boundaries between our different departments blur. And as you can imagine, when we start talking about post-secondary pathways, we want to get some of that started in the high school. And so therefore, we need to be able to talk to each other across those boundaries seamlessly. I mentioned our interest in comparing to our neighbors. And while we talk about how Missouri is seeking to be the best in the Midwest, we all know in the end, this is really not about a competition. It's about bringing out the best we have within our states. And it's just good to be able to use and leverage with each other. What is it that we're trying to do and how do we get that done better? And that's what makes these kind of coalitions work so well. It's what makes SHEO work so well. We can identify those issues and come together and take them on head on. And also expanding the awareness of earnings and employment outcomes at the degree level helps us support our institutional leaders and in turn strengthen their ability to meet the needs of employers. It tees up the ability to have regional and perhaps multi-state regional conversations about industry, as well as opportunities to strengthen program offerings. This goes back to my comment a bit ago about the changing economics. Our institutions have got to learn to be more agile and be able to address state needs more quickly and fully. I think our community colleges are built to do this more naturally and more readily. And I think our research universities certainly know their role and play a high flying level of what will be future developing spinoffs of technology and research. It's the regional universities, and I think that's probably true in most every state. The regional universities are the ones that have got to find that niche. How do they plug in and play a part in terms of what is the economic development plan for their region and how can they be an asset and play a significant part of that? Missouri's 2 major metropolitan areas are located on opposite ends of our state with St. Louis and Kansas City. And those booming economies are shared with bordering states, Kansas and Illinois. So what are ways we can look past our artificial state boundaries in some ways to provide seamless workforce preparation services? Consider that Kansas City was designated a federal regional technology and innovation hub. That is excellent for both Missouri and Kansas. So how can Kansas and Missouri partner together and leverage that designation to further strengthen the entire region more broadly? One of the issues that's keeping me up at night is the erosion of confidence in our higher education institutions in the context of changing demographics, economics, and technology, as I've already been alluding to. We need the most complete picture of outcomes that we can get our hands on to help not only improve policies and programs, but also frame our messaging and consider doing so regionally and even nationally. And by regionally, I mean within the state's regions. And I would argue that marrying the post-secondary and employment outcomes data is with real stories of alumni success. That's going to help the general public understand what our institutions are about. I recall a few years ago about reading of cities that drive nationally region economic development. And the major cities were Atlanta, Chicago, Denver, Boston. You get the idea. These are major cities that have multi-state impacts in where they're located. And from this perspective, state borders are inhibiting. What we need to do is be able to converge logically across the data that guides our systems and guides our policy decisions. PSEO helps Missouri answer questions we can't easily answer with our own data, such as how many computer science bachelor degree completers are staying to work in the state 5 years post-completion. Missouri's two major metropolitan hubs, St. Louis and Kansas City, the Missouri-only data will only tell part of the story, and we really do need to know what's the greater impact. So you can see here where from this slide where our computer and information science folks are being spread out and about. And then I'm sure, like you, we're worried about industry participation in terms of our educators. And so education majors are working in education in Missouri and elsewhere. How might we tell the story differently in terms of just the Missouri-only employment, but what else are our education majors going into? And how does that impact our bordering states? Those that offer higher wages, we can then use PSEO data to explore that issue and help make case making for competitive teacher salaries. This is already an issue in the Kansas City region. We train teachers in Kansas City, Missouri, they can cross the river and get a substantially better paying job, even at their startup level. That's something that's important for us to be able to know and to say, does that happen a lot? And then how do we take that information back to our own legislature? So PSEO allows us to have those kinds of information, those kinds of conversations, and then to talk about how can we do a better job in terms of preparing Missourians and then serving Missouri's economic development and workforce preparation. So thank you. As you can see, the PSEO Coalition really is a guide to the future in terms of our policy work among the states. Your work really does matter, and your ability to connect and communicate with each other matters both to us and across our states for comparisons, but also across state borders in terms of partnering. And it takes this data to completely understand the training outcomes and what else do we need to be doing to help fulfill our mission to put Missourians on paths to learn, work, and prosper. So allow me to say that we have a lot of important work to do here in Missouri. And we are excited about what we have in terms of the unusualness of merging workforce preparation directly into post-secondary education. But it takes good data to make good policy. And in this day and age, we have to be able to stick to the numbers to keep the conversation focused on tact as it needs to be. So I thank you for this opportunity, and I thank you for your work. I thank you for your time, and I'm thankful that you're networked together so that you can teach the rest of us how's the best way to help this to go. So with that, let me drop my slide and release this and open this back up. Gina, here we are. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so very, very much, Dr. Boggs. It was such a pleasure to hear from you. And to your point about the Lumina meeting from years ago and the fact that you happened to have just the right letters to spell out dude without having to force that just makes me very happy. I have to say other members of the PSEO Coalition are a little bit jealous of Missouri and being able to use such a cool acronym like that. So often our acronyms don't make sense or we can't turn them into an amazing word like dude. So
when I first got here, there were so many inside jokes. I've gone blank. What's the movie with the
oh, the dude abides. Is
yes.
That, yeah.
I had to go pull the thing. I had to go on a streaming line and pull it up. I had not watched the movie all the way through, so I was not getting all the in-house jokes when I first moved here. So
right, The Big Lebowski.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Yes.
Allie. Yes, yeah, you don't necessarily want to wear that for a Halloween costume, probably, but I totally get the references. So we know that you are massively busy, and so we so appreciate the time that you spent with us. The last thing I want to say before we say goodbye to you is just to thank you again for serving as our plenary speaker, because you really highlighted and you really walk the walk, in my opinion, and from what I've heard of the wonderful Missourians who participate in the PSEO Coalition, who work with and for you, is that you really, as a leader, believe what you're saying. You use data, you ask for data, and you value data in answering the big questions that you have to wrestle with, we all have to wrestle with. And with that, I believe you're off to a meeting to wrestle with some questions right now that are going to impact Missourians.
I appreciate that. And I did have a surprising meeting get scheduled. I'll have to run to. I do thank you very much, and you're very kind. I also want to give a shout out. You know, none of us get to do this alone, and or can possibly do this alone. So I am grateful. Veronica Galsauskas, Jeremy Kinzel, who are very active in this group. Our department couldn't get our work done without the two of them, and they reflect, of course, an entire team with our post-secondary strategy and data group and the Merrick team. So thank you very much for that. But I also, again, what I would say about my group, I'm sure your directors would say about everyone participating on this call. It's important work, and we lean on you to get it done. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Boggs. Have a wonderful rest of the week.
Take care. You too.
Thanks. Fabulous. And for the rest of us, I want to share a few things before we take a break. We are actually going to take a brief break in between each of the sessions. We know 3 hours is a long time for folks to need to sit in one place. So we know everyone's going to need to stretch and grab some coffee or water or whatever you need. But I want to do a little bit of an introduction so you know what's coming next. And then in between, we are actually going to have some slides that are going to provide some resources. So as you're kind of wandering and stretching your legs and coming back before the hour, we're going to have some slides that are have some QR codes, some links, some other things, and some trivia, because I think trivia is fun. And so we're going to have that for you. But I just want to highlight the fact that, first of all, since we had our wonderful Vice Chair Rachel Boon do the introduction of Dr. Boggs, that I wanted to introduce myself to you. I am Gina Johnson. I serve as the director of the PSEO Coalition and have done so since we were able to have a director in place since March of 2024. So it's been almost a year of this fantastic work. My background is in policy research, it's in institutional research, and it's in teaching. I've been in education my whole career, starting as a special education teacher. An example of which Dr. Boggs shared, which is I was a person who went to college and grew up and went to college in Minnesota, and then crossed the Mississippi River every day to go to work in Wisconsin. So I would be one of those people who I suppose it would be valuable to have in the data set on those cross-border kinds of situations that we're dealing with. As Rachel shared, the PSEO is a partnership amongst states and the US Census Bureau, where we share data so that we can have access to much more data than we would have access to on our own about where our post-secondary education completers are going and what kinds of industries they're working in and what kinds of wages that they're earning. So it's a wonderful data set. We have amazing partners in the US Census Bureau who work with us on this project. So you'll hear us use the term PSEO, and that's the project, that's the data sharing, and you'll hear us use the term PSEO Coalition, which is the entities that share data with the census along with our partners at Census, who regularly meet on a monthly basis and yearly in person, and any other time that we're able to connect to share resources and share ideas, and to also share with our census partners ideas of how we can always continuously improve the work that we're doing with these data and the data set themselves. So to orient you to the showcase and where we're headed, as you just experienced, Dr. Boggs kicked us off with an example of how a post-secondary education and workforce, in this case, because they're connected very carefully in Missouri, thinks about data in making decisions and setting policy. In session 2, we're very excited. We're going to be able to feature 3 states, Minnesota, Texas, and Colorado, who are all serving as leaders in the education to workforce data sharing space. We have partners, we'll talk a bit more in the introduction to that session, but our partners at Strata Education Foundation have prepared a wonderful document called the State Opportunity Index, and we're focused in on the clear outcomes elements of that index. And all 3 of these states that we're going to feature in session 2 have been identified through that work, through that research, as leaders in sharing data and information with constituents and stakeholders. Then we're going to take another short break, and we're going to come back in session 3. We're going to feature the states of Iowa and Hawaii. And they are really digging in and thinking about how can they use PSEO data specifically to enhance their use of education to workforce data. And in particular, we're very pleased to have these folks and these states represented because the two individuals who will be speaking in session 3 have been massively helpful, along with many other folks, including some folks that I recognized when I was looking at the participant list. We have a committee of folks on the PSEO Coalition who are helping advise our student interns, who are able to take the data and do some creative visualizations and creative analyses with those data on behalf of all of the coalition members. And so in session 3, we're going to hear from the University of Hawaii system, and we're going to hear from the Iowa Board of Regents. And then we're also going to hear from our student interns and the professor who is coordinating our student interns and the work that they're doing. So we're going to see, hence the term showcase, we're going to see a showcase of some of the work that they are featuring, and we're very excited about that.